So our next session is really, really special. It's a bit of a trademark of our Awaken conferences that we do a couch. We call it a couch session. And it is women from our own community and our own family who share their stories. So this is what's going to happen next. And I'm going to hand over in the next few seconds. Lelané, just give them a few more seconds to come in. I'm going to hand over to Lelané, and she is going to take it from here. Lelané, maybe just join me quickly. Okay, ladies, so let's just settle down. Let's just settle down. I would love to just give you a picture of this amazing woman. So give her a hand. So Lelané's been part of our congregation for, help me, 11 years. She's been part of Shofar East London, and she's been playing a major role in so many things in this church without really being noticed. What I mean is that you have seen photos and you have seen videos and you have seen life change in people that can all be credited to Lelané. And she's never pushed for any platform or any position. She's just been serving faithfully in this house. And last year, she released a book, and she's going to share more about that. But now she's not only a graphic designer and a very good photographer and a woman who's changing lives. She's now also an author, and I am super proud of her. So I can guarantee you the next session is really, really going to bless you. So I'm going to hand over to Lelané, and she will call the people forward who's going to share. But Lelané, I honor you. I honor you for so many hours that you have served in this house without asking for a reward, without asking for praise or even a thank you. You've just been serving, and I really want to honor you for that. And I thank you. You are a gift to our house. Thank you. Let's give her another hand.
I feel like we'll just let Sonika do this. This is so nice. Shall everyone get a turn? Sure, ladies, good morning. It is still morning, right? We're on the brink. Good morning. This is our couch session. Now, apart from couch session being a bit of a tongue twister, try it. Say it 3 times really fast. I dare you. It is also a beautiful space where we get to share some stories. Now, the reason we make time for stories is because stories are points of connection. It's that place where you're sitting with your friend and they're sharing their story and you're like, oh my word, it's not just me. Instant connection. Or you're sitting with someone and they're describing how they feel and they're describing a season of life and you're like, that is exactly how I feel. You just gave voice to it. Instant connection. And so that's why we make space for it. We make space for testimony because testimonies are significant because they are invitations. And so your testimony is an invitation to someone else. And this morning we have some ladies who are going to join me who are extending an invitation to you. Because when you hear someone's testimony, it's an invitation for you to say, God, I want that. What you did in them, I want you to do in me. And so I want you to open your hearts wide, and I know you just sat down, but I am going to ask you to please stand and welcome the 2 ladies who are joining me this morning, Yukta Chaglal and Hannah Gono. Listen, I apologize in advance for anyone on this side. You're in a perfect position to see my grey hair regrowth. And I know it's not a very glamorous sight, but like my heart is with you. Okay. So welcome, ladies. Thank you very much for joining me. It's just never as fun to be here by myself. Now, Sonika's already mentioned, but we have a wonderful community of women here in church, and they have stories. All of you have stories, which is what makes it so difficult to choose who we're going to have on the couch on these events. But within these ladies' lives is a gift for each and every one of us this morning. Now, they might share some stories that you haven't necessarily lived. Maybe you can't directly resonate with some of the things that they say, but there are certain themes and lessons in life that is applicable regardless of the context. So I really do want you to consider this session as an invitation. I want you to open your heart wide and to lean in and to really listen, not just to the words you're going to hear, but listen to what the Holy Spirit is saying to you. Because as they're sharing, as we're all sharing, it's important to hear, but the more pressing voice is the voice of the Holy Spirit. And I am trusting that as we're sharing, He's going to whisper something personal to you this morning. Now, before we dive into this session, I know you're very curious about the ladies next to me. You all heard all about me. That's boring now. We're moving on. So I asked them to come ready to introduce themselves to you, because who better to introduce yourself than yourself? So we're going to start with Yukta. Yukta, won't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Good morning, ladies. As Lelané introduced me, my name is Yukta Jaglal, and I'm 24 years old. I was born and raised in Durban, and I moved here to East London about 1.5 years ago, and this was due to work. So currently, I work as a trainee food safety specialist at Nestle. So that basically means I'm part of the team that ensures your chocolates are safe for you to eat, so that you can enjoy them. So you can enjoy them without any worry. I'm also the youngest and only daughter of a family of 4. So it's just my parents, me, and my older brother. I really look forward to sharing my story with you. Thank you.
I think I speak for everyone when I say we're very grateful for you, Yukta. We are very, very grateful. Thank you. Keep doing what you're doing. We will pray for you and bless you afterwards. Thank you. They're laughing, but they're all like, yes, please. So next to Yukta, we have Hannah. Hannah, won't you introduce us?
Sure. So my name is Hannah Gonner. I am a grade 3 teacher at Clarendon Prep, and I am married to Jean-Pierre Gonner, who is the assistant pastor here at Shofar, and we have 2 beautiful girls, Ava and Ella.
Oh, beautiful. I love it. Thanks, Hannah. Thank you very much. Now that you are a little more familiar with us here on the stage, let's jump right in. Now, Sonika mentioned it earlier, but joy is one of the 9 fruits of the spirits. We find it in Galatians 5. And yes, it's a long list. I'm going to embarrass myself if I try and remember them. But joy stands alongside some pretty important stuff, like things we talk about all the time, peace and love and kindness and faithfulness and all the things. But I don't know about you, but I find that joy is the hardest one to resonate with, because it just doesn't seem like it goes with reality. Like, there is a perception about joy. I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Inside Out, right? That little yellow character. She's very cute, but I'm like, girl, I don't live your life. Like, everything is exciting all the time. And that's like, you feel like if I'm going to live a life of joy, that's what it's supposed to look like. You're not supposed to have a bad moment. You're not supposed to ask questions. You're not supposed to struggle with anything or have any feelings other than joy, which is a bit problematic, because I do have bad moments, and I do have feelings that are not necessarily particularly joyful, and I struggle. I have questions sometimes. So what do I do with that? Now, the question is then, how do we live a life of joy? Do I have to deny reality? Do I need to pretend like things aren't happening? Do I need to bog down every feeling that's not joy and just pretend? Well, I personally have been on a bit of a joy journey. So as Sonika mentioned, I wrote a little book. I have it here. It's a big book, girl. Not the bottom one, eh? It's the top one. The bottom one Jesus wrote. This is me. If you're sitting at the back, it's my Bible. Okay. But I wrote this book, and it's about the book of Philippians. And it's known as, I don't know if you know, but it's known as the joyful epistle in the Bible. And I recently released it last year, December. And this book really is the fruit of what was a 2-year-long struggle with joy, where it felt like I had none, absolutely nothing. And it was through the book of Philippians that the Lord delivered me. It was through actually understanding some of the principles that are applied in that book that I got freedom. But I'll share a bit more about that later. So before we get too far ahead, let's see if we can get a bit more clarity on some of these questions we're asking this morning through the stories you're about to hear. Now, the stories you're about to hear this morning are full of ups and downs. They're full of disappointment, struggle, and hope. And they're full of bold steps of faith and quiet trust. But in all of them, you will hear joy. And it might not sound the way you think, and it might not sound the way you expect, but you will hear joy. Not superficial, just keep smiling kind of joy, but deep-rooted, authentic joy that only comes from the Lord. So I want to encourage you again, and I might do this several times this morning. I really want you to open your heart, fling it wide open, and allow your heart to be stirred and possibly even your perception of joy. So on that note, I would love for us to start with Yukta's story this morning. Now, I haven't known Yukta very long. We've had a few coffees, but what struck me about her when I first met her was her confidence and her willingness to share. She really does have such a heart to share what the Lord has done in her life. And so I'm very excited for you to hear her story. Because Yukta has a beautiful story. She has a story full of pursuit and surrender. One where God met her on the long road and not the quick shortcut. You'll see reflected in her story the true nature and source of joy. Now, Yukta, the confidence I mentioned you didn't always have, right? Won't you share a bit of your backstory with us? How did you grow up? And what were those beginning formative years like for you?
I was brought up in a Hindu household, so that basically means your religion, your culture, and your identity were deeply intertwined, sort of like almost inseparable. We perform rituals and prayers to many different deities. For example, there's a goddess called Lakshmi, which is the goddess of home and divine feminine power, which we often look to, in terms of peace in our homes. But I struggled as a kid to understand why we needed to do these certain things and what was its significance, because its actions didn't make sense to me. And then if we didn't do these things in a specific way, something bad might happen, So at the same time, I felt very confused and even fear-driven. So transitioning from my childhood to my teenage years, I felt very lost. I had no sense of peace or belonging. I also struggled with chronic skin diseases such as eczema, psoriasis, cystic acne. So for a teenage girl, that really took a knock to my self-esteem. I also had trouble sleeping at night. I was plagued by bad dreams, which actually left me really exhausted, moody, and withdrawn. I know, not a really nice teenager to be around. Despite these inner struggles, my surface appearance was that of an A student at school. I was competitive and a well-rounded when it came to sports. So you could say my personality was a little bit tomboyish. But at the same time, inside, my attitude was very negative, and hopelessness came more naturally than hope did. However, at 16, everything changed in my life. A serious car accident changed my family's world upside down, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. It brought us closer, and it really opened our eyes to see how fragile life really is. But I really had an aftermath that was very, very heavy. I had to care for my injured loved ones, which left me emotionally exhausted. And deep down, there was also an unsteadiness, like a part of me went quiet. In grade 10, just as I was beginning the foundation of my future, I spiraled. My grades dropped significantly to a point where I couldn't even apply for university in matric. For a family that really tried to stay spiritually and practically afloat, the traditions and the prayers that we upheld, we just felt stuck, heavy, spiritually stifled. But there was one person who didn't give up to me. And that's why I resonate so much with Marriott, is the fact that my mom was always there for me. With her support, I eventually made it to university, and that alone felt like a small miracle.
Sure, that's amazing. Now, we often hear the story that starts with, I grew up in a Christian home, right? But the one less common is the one where I grew up in a home with a completely different religious belief system. Yukta grew up in a Hindu household. But I would dare to say that they're not that far removed from one another in principle. Because the truth is, there is a longing in all of us. Now, that is a longing for belonging, for family, for purpose, for something, or maybe even someone to fix things when everything feels broken. Now, some might look to religious deities or traditions or anything like that, but others might look at visiting a church here and there. Maybe we're hopping around a little bit. But some try burying themselves in work, thinking there's my sense of purpose and belonging. Others look to friends and family to fill the void. The thing is, the pursuit after those things are not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just a problem if it lands you anywhere other than Jesus. So, Yukta, it doesn't sound like those beginning years were easy for you. Now, you mentioned your mom specifically here, and what you might not know is Yukta's mom actually converted from Hinduism to Christianity within her life. So why was her love and support so significant and important to you?
My mom is one of the strongest fighters I know. I've learned so much from her, especially when it comes to her faith. Her belief in Jesus is absolutely unshakable. She prayed daily and worshipped with a freedom that was hard to ignore. Her journey to Jesus was gradual but powerful. Actually, to give you a few testimonies, I'll actually include my mom's and my pastor's at home in the story. So she met our pastor many years ago, before I was even born. So it's been quite a long journey, guys. Our pastor's story is incredible too. She was a Maharaj girl, the daughter of a Pandit, a Hindu priest. So it's much like being a pastor's daughter in church. However, in this case, she was also part of the Brahmin caste, the highest in the Hindu hierarchy, which carried a great spiritual status and strict expectations. So her conversion to Christianity really inspired my mom deeply. Around 9 years old, I remember my pastor used to visit our home, where she came to pray for my brother, my mom, and me. In this case here, my dad was open, but not really into like whatever my mom was going through at that time. But he let her go on a journey, okay? So how she actually met our pastor at the time was through a Muslim man. As my mom works as a sales rep, she meets a lot of people on her journey. And this man actually converted to Christianity after our pastor now came to pray for his daughter who was bedridden and she was on the brink of death. And she was miraculously brought back to life. So when they introduced, basically they formed a bond that really carried them throughout some of the hardest seasons of their life. They prayed together, they supported one another, and they kept choosing faith throughout it all. As I grew older, I noticed my mom becoming more open about her faith at home. In my early teens, especially when you become a little bit more observant, I saw a Bible in her car where it stayed for years, a quiet sign of where her heart was rooted. Dad was going through a lot with his work at this time and also with his health, but she showed us what true courage looked like. She prayed for him, she stood by him, and showed us all what it means to be a woman that loves Jesus. Everything seems to fall into place for her. It still does, to be honest. And she still has this fire in her, a glow really. And everyone noticed, and I began to see things differently. Christianity started to look incredibly appealing, not because of the rules or religion, but because of the peace and strength I saw in my mom. She wasn't confused or lost. She was secure, and that really spoke volumes to me.
Sure. Listen, Matthew 7 verse 20 says that therefore we'll know them by their fruit. And I think Yukta's mom is such a beautiful example of that, of by simply bearing witness to her mom's life, she could recognize that there was something different about her. There's something different here. And so moms, if you're in the room, I don't know if you find this very encouraging, but I feel like it really is encouraging, that I think we can sometimes so stress about saying the wrong thing, that it's really in the doing, it's in the living. And your fruit that you show your kids, if it looks appealing enough, they'll want to imitate it in their own lives, as Yukta did, even though it just started with a curiosity. Now, this isn't just exclusive to parenting, though. This whole principle of someone seeing something in someone's life and going, oh, that's different, has led many people into church buildings and into the kingdom. The whole concept of living a visibly fruitful life is so impactful. And so, Yukta, how did witnessing your mom's journey in Christianity impact you? And how did you feel about this different faith?
Okay. So the journey for me wasn't instant. I was very hesitant at first. I had a deep-rooted commitment to Hinduism, not by, okay, I'll say this, it is more by an inheritance than by understanding. It was a religion I was born into, the only one I ever knew. So exploring anything outside of that felt impossible without facing judgment or ridicule. It felt like I really didn't belong anywhere. But Mom actually convinced my brother and I to come to church with her. Initially, I just went to appease her. It wasn't like a big spiritual decision. But I did think, like, what do I have to lose? So I was open, but not yet convinced. As I went to church, it wasn't easy. I struggled to concentrate, especially during scripture readings, because I didn't grow up in church. I didn't go to Sunday school or attend youth or really learned about the foundations of the Christian faith as a child. So people my age seemed to have this head start, and I didn't know how to catch up. I still struggled with emptiness, self-doubt, emotional heaviness, and it didn't just disappear when I was in a church building. I had no love in the spaces I was in or in the relationships that I had maintained. I was there, but I wasn't connected. It felt like I was on the outside looking in.
Sure. You know, being in a church building and having a relationship with the Lord are two very different things. The building is brick, that's wonderful, it's beautiful, and it's the perfect place to be. In fact, Yukta was positioned in the perfect place. Like, you want to be in church, this is where you want to be at. But yet, in the absence of her own revelation of the Lord, it just didn't quite hit the mark. And now, I'm sure maybe some of us can resonate with that. Maybe you've attended church a few times and you still have a few lingering feelings that just hasn't gone away. Well, sometimes, even when we try all we know to try, we still just don't get the breakthrough that we're trusting for. But this isn't the end of Yukta's story, though. Now, Yukta, now that we understand your mom's influence in your life a little bit better, let's circle back to your story. So you've now just matriculated. You are on your way to varsity thanks to the encouragement and belief of your mom. What was this next season of your life like?
So university wasn't just earning a degree. It was a journey of faith, of growth, and learning to trust God more deeply. I started university studying biotechnology, but I came there with the mentality to do my utmost best. But then I also began to soon worry about my job prospects, as any other student would. But as I began to actually be open about this while I was in university, a professor actually suggested to me to switch to food science and technology. And soon after, a close friend actually confirmed and encouraged me to do that too. There was more confirmations coming through, and I really felt that God was gently leading me in this new direction. I was hesitant, but I did take this up, and I had this decision prayed over with my parents and my pastor, and then we felt peace about the change. The transition from one course to another was challenging, but I adjusted, I stayed patient, and I kept trusting God through it all. 2 years later, I did graduate, and to my surprise, it was a cum laude distinction. I had no expectation. I was just trying to stay faithful. But this moment actually really resonates very deeply with me because I know that God was guiding me every step of the way. It wasn't just an academic victory. It was a sign of where I was that right where I needed to be, with a future that was built entirely on His foundation.
Come on now. I mean, it's amazing how you went from like this struggling season in high school to just absolutely thriving. And it's amazing how sometimes when you look back on your life, you can see these little traces of where the Lord led you, which is so beautiful. Now, I imagine, you have this beautiful victory, cum laude, it's amazing, but now starts the part you were worried about, which is securing a job. So what happened next?
Okay. So as any other graduate, I struggled, especially with our economy and things like that, but not to be dimming the mood. I did apply to many food companies. I sent emails. I even reached out to HR recruitment on LinkedIn after formulating my own profile. Yet nothing was opening up for me. 4 months into the year, my pastor actually called the church into a time of fasting and praying, where she was teaching us how to use the armor of God from Ephesians 6, verse 10 to 18, a way to spiritually prepare yourself for life's battles. And the things that really resonated with me was the belt of truth, which holds everything together with God's word as your foundation, the shield of faith, which protects you from doubt, fear, and the enemy's lies, and the helmet of salvation, which guards your mind, reminds you of your identity and your hope in Jesus. This teaching really stirred something in me. And to be honest, to this day, I don't know how I just became curious all of a sudden. But for the first time in my life, I wanted to truly experience God for myself, the way that my pastor and my mom had, hoping that whatever had transformed then, it would happen to me too. In the third day of the fast, something powerful happened. I was alone in my room, I was reading the Bible, and I was listening to a song called I Surrender by Hillsong Worship. I felt the presence of God so strongly that I broke down in tears, a form of release I hadn't experienced in many, many years. I forgave those who hurt me. I laid down my burdens at his feet, and I clothed myself in his armor. Years of weight and heaviness lifted off me. I felt free. I knew right then that salvation had reached me and that life would never be the same. That encounter marked the beginning of my personal faith journey. Mom had led the way for the family, showing us what it's like to trust a God who sees, who hears, and answers. I've seen her faith sustain us through tough times, but now I got to experience it for myself. My journey has been of one of quiet steps and countless of miracles, but I've found an everlasting friend in Jesus, and he's never left my side. So, as an example, now that I can give that, my whole family actually walks in Christ, and that's all from my mom and the journey that we've gone through, and I can never stop being thankful for that.
Come on. Yeah. Yeah, statistically, like conversions from Hinduism is actually very, very rare because of how the faith is so ingrained in your culture and your identity. And so your whole family is this beautiful exception to the rule, which is just the power of Jesus. Jesus doesn't bow to any rule. And so we say this in church all the time, but it really is just because it's true, that it honestly takes one encounter with God to change everything. Everything changes. It takes one. And what started as just witnessing the life of your mom and your pastor turned into a curiosity, turned into a yearning within your own heart. And so we mentioned earlier how sometimes you do everything you know to do. You're trying everything and it's just not working. Now in Yukta's story, we can see that she was searching for something. She knew that something was missing. There was an emptiness. There was a heaviness. But the thing that made her press in wasn't necessarily the plight to get rid of that. It was more to get a job. It was very practical. But I love how in that moment, that is not what God spoke about. He didn't say who to message on LinkedIn. He didn't address any job opportunities. What he addressed was her heart, because that's what he's after. That was the more pressing topic of the moment. And so sometimes, I know this is true for me, we can get stuck with tunnel vision. We want the breakthrough that we want, and sometimes you even miss the one that you actually need. And so, Yukta, this is incredible. You're in this place of encounter, committing your life to the Lord. What a significant day. But that week was significant, though, wasn't it? Won't you share with us what happened in the aftermath of this encounter?
So in the season of securing a job, I persistently applied for internships to big food companies such as Nestle, Tiger Brands, Unilever, Coca-Cola, you name it. I was determined, and like I mentioned, I messaged, I sent emails to HR. I was putting in the work, but I was really just waiting on God's timing. So in that same week of the fast, and that after that powerful encounter I had with God, doors started to open. interview calls from both Nestle and Tiger brands. But Nestle actually responded so quickly that they wanted me that within just 2 weeks, I packed up and moved to Escort, which was 300 kilometers away from home, for the opportunity. This was my first time actually living away from home, and it felt like a huge leap. I'm still working at Nestle, and I'm genuinely loving every moment of it. And this internship was something I really did pray for since second year. It was in my heart ever since. So it's a reminder to me all the time that how faithful God truly is. My life has completely changed for the better. I'm not just living with purpose, I'm walking in answered prayers.
Amen. Listen, we said we're going to make t-shirts out of that because that's good, eh? That's good stuff. Listen, something that I am continuously learning in my own walk with the Lord is that He really will get to everything. Sometimes I like to rearrange the order to my personal preference, which turns out is never just the best plan. He has a better one. And so Yukta was trusting for a job. God addressed her heart first. There were more pressing things to take care of, but that doesn't mean what she was asking for was forgotten. It doesn't mean it was unimportant. It doesn't mean that he didn't hear her cry. He did. And so sometimes it's so difficult for us to let go of what we think the answer to our life is. And we all have an idea normally. I mean, I always say to people, like, I have an idea. I like my idea. I came up with it. Like, why wouldn't I like it? So we all have an idea of what we think the answer to our joy is. Some of us might think it's a little bit more money. Maybe paying off that debt is going to be the thing. Maybe, just not struggling at the end of the month. That's going to be the thing. That's what I'm trusting for. And if I have that, then I'm going to be good. Maybe you feel it's the promotion at work. It's going to be the thing that points to all the hard work you're doing is worth it. That, like, it puts purpose into everything. That's going to be it. Maybe it's starting the business. Maybe it's traveling the world. Maybe it's starting a family, whatever it is for you. But is it though? Could it be that God is teaching the one yearning for more of an income to steward finances in difficult times? Maybe He's teaching generosity. Maybe He's wanting you to trust Him with the unknown. Is that possible? Maybe for those looking for promotion, maybe God is like, hey, I don't want you to look up. I want you to look at your colleagues around you. They need to see your fruitful life for a little bit longer before we get you out of this office. He's got a different focus. And so the question we need to ask ourselves is, can I let go of what I think is most important and allow God to lead the conversation? And so, Yukta, your story so beautifully captures how the Lord pursues us. You have now committed your life and you have this job that you dreamed of. So were there any other changes, anything else that shifted in you and your family's life after your encounter with the Lord?
Oh, definitely. I can say that with confidence in my life, there's a clear before and after. I like to refer to as BC and AC, if anyone knows that. So before Christ and after Christ. So since encountering Jesus, everything has changed for me. In every way I can see the world, there's a steadiness in me now that I had never had before. As a little girl, I've always wanted to become the best version of myself. I never wanted to waste my potential. But life isn't always straightforward. I've known what it's like to be driven and inspired, yet I've also known and experienced emptiness and stagnation. That contrast actually still stays with me to this day, and it teaches me a lot. When I met Jesus, something clicked. My life has a purpose. I was made for more. He reignited a fire in me using the gifts that He has bestowed upon me. Some I'm actually still figuring out. Though I'm still on this journey, I truly believe in each new season, there will be something that's revealed even more. And honestly, I can't wait. Confidence has been a drastic change in me. I can say that for sure. I used to panic and cry before I even used to speak in public. Like I had this really, really deep anxiety. But now with every presentation or corporate meeting that I have, I pray by asking the Holy Spirit to speak through me. I have the knowledge, but it's the peace and calm during these moments that truly amaze me. I often receive positive feedback from my colleagues, especially for someone so young as me, that I know it's not by my own strength. Jesus has restored so much in me. And I honestly can't imagine being this way without him.
Sure. What a beautiful testimony of Jesus. Now, when we look at Yukta's story, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of struggles, internal and external. And she tried many things to get freedom from these things, but it wasn't until she met Jesus. It wasn't until she encountered him that everything changed. Now, you might sit there and think to yourself, well, I've been a Christian my whole life. How does this apply to me? You know, I've been walking with the Lord now for about 14, 15 years, and I still love hearing stories of people coming to Jesus because it reminds me of when the lights came on for me. It reminds me that I could have very easily lived my life without him and the difference that he makes. And it reminds us to not be casual and familiar with it, that this is not a gift that we've earned. It's a gift that we receive. And so we can look in many different places for many different things. But the fruit of the Spirit only grows in one place, and it grows when you're connected to the vine, as the word says in John 15, the vine representing Jesus. That's where we grow fruit, joy being one of them. Now, maybe you haven't looked to a different religion. Maybe you have. But we've all fallen victim to the trickery of the enemy, where we look to something else other than Jesus to fill the voids in our heart. Maybe it's, your work or your phone. No? Anyone got caught up in a scroll? We're all looking to something, but that's not the thing that unlocks the confidence and the joy that Yukta has now. It's found in Jesus. We don't find it in our culture. We don't find it in our traditions. You don't find it in your studies or your family or your friends, for that matter. They're important and we need them, but they're not the source. It's when we encounter Jesus that things shift. Now, I hope that we'll use Yukta's story as a bit of an invitation to curiosity. It was curiosity that led her to dare to fast and pray that first time. And so curiosity sometimes is what you need to be willing to be uncomfortable. And maybe just being here is a bit uncomfortable for you this morning, in which case, well done. No? And like the invitation to be curious is sometimes what you need to be able to ask the question. Ask God, are we having the same conversation? Is the thing that I think that's going to unlock my joy the thing that you think is going to unlock my joy? And so, Yukta, thank you for sharing your story with us this morning. Some love for Yukta, guys. Now, next to Yukta, we have Hannah. Now, Hannah and I haven't known each other very well before this session, but we've had a few chit-chats here in church. And something that really struck me about her when I first met her was just the way in which she carries joy, which you only have to spend a few minutes with her to really find that out. But you can tell that she is the kind of person that wants everyone to feel seen and loved, and it's so beautiful. Now, if you have been a member in our church for the last few years, you'll also know that Hannah was the lady everyone wanted to meet when she joined our church. You see, I said to Hannah, I'm going to call all of us out this morning. We all wanted to know who this gorgeous woman was who stole our assistant pastor JP's heart. We just saw her silently here in the front, but everybody wanted to know. But Hannah is so much more than that. And she has an amazing story. A story that's full of adventure and adversity. A story of disappointment and hope. And one that shows us what happens when we dare to say yes to the call of God, even when you don't see the full picture. Now, Hannah, your story starts a couple of years ago. In fact, you were still in high school. So why don't you tell us why that season of your life was so significant?
Yes, sure. So my story started in high school, and it actually started at a church holiday club. And I'd done quite a few of them before, but this one was different because there was a little boy who came, and he was only 5 years old. And the rule for the holiday club was children were only allowed to join if they were 6 years old. But we felt bad for him, and no one had the heart to say no, so we let him stay. And for some reason, I felt responsible for him. So I would look after him, and I'd watch out for him. And during the holiday club, we played these videos, and I'd always go and find him, and I'd put him on my lap, and he'd often fall asleep. And for some reason, just this inexplicable amount of love for him started to form. And like I said, it was inexplicable. And in the mornings, he would arrive on this bus full of other children, and he'd leave in the afternoon on this bus full of children. And so at the end of the holiday club, I asked, what's the story with the bus? And I was told that he came from Greensleeves, which is a place of safety for abused and abandoned children. And this made my heart go out to him even more. And his name was Kwekwe. And at school the next term, you won't believe it, but the Interact committee actually decided that Greensleeves was going to be their outreach. So of course I volunteered straight away to go and visit the kids, but actually just to see Kwekwe. It was on my second or third time out there that they told us the really sad news that some of their children had drowned in the dam on their farm. And so it wasn't Kwekwe, but it was some of the other children who were living on the farm. And I just remember being so sad and then realizing that I can actually do something to help, because even though I was in high school, I was also a swimming coach on the weekends. I did it just to get some extra pocket money. So I asked my boss, is it okay? Can we give these kids free swimming lessons? And she said yes. And then my wonderful sister and friends helped. And so that was just such a beautiful time to spend with Kwekwe, but also to actually teach the children how to be water safe. And as time passed, I asked my parents if Kwekwe could come and spend Christmases with us and holidays. And I'm so grateful that even though that wasn't their calling, they let me live out mine. And so, I was responsible for him. I had to make sure he'd brushed his teeth and went to bed on time. And I think growing up in a family that had good structure and discipline helped to give me a blueprint to look after him. And then after school, I went to Rhodes University to study my teaching degree. And this was difficult because I was far from Kwekwe. And Kweks is a man of very few words. So I didn't always feel that I could tell him how much he meant to me or tell him how much I loved him. But I always felt that when I made time for him and I went to see him, that was my way of showing him that I really loved him.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's amazing how the Lord will just use very natural circumstances in our life to give us a heart for something. So for Hannah, she just volunteered at a holiday club, as she did every other time. And in this particular instance, the Lord sent a little boy who just needed what Hannah had to give, which was a home for the holidays, a bit of structure and routine, and a whole lot of love. Now, Hannah, it sounds like you did everything you could to connect with Kwekwe and to build a relationship with him, even when you were far away, being very intentional. And I'm sure that by this time, you guys had a really close relationship. But we all know you don't stay in varsity forever, or at least that's the goal, for that degree to end. So what happened when you finished your studies? What was next for you?
So once I completed my degree, I tried to actually find a job in Grahamstown because my boyfriend at the time was still studying there, but I couldn't. So I decided to take a gap year overseas and to go and au pair. So I ended up in Italy, Ireland, and in England. And it was such a daunting experience to fly alone. I was leaving everything and everyone I knew behind. But Jesus was coming with me, so it really grew my relationship with God. And then it also actually gave me practice at being a mummy. So I had to fetch children and feed children and bath children and bed children. And so it really gave me good experience with that. And by the end of my year of au pairing, I had found a full-time job in Grahamstown, so I went back. And those of you who teach will know how difficult it is in your first year of teaching. So first of all, you have to get used to waking up at the crack of dawn. Then you are exposed to millions of germs. And then you have to sit opposite a parent, even though you're half their age, and tell them what to do, even though you don't have children of your own. It's very daunting. And even though it was daunting, I knew it was my calling. I love children. In my second year of teaching in Grahamstown, I really felt that God was calling my heart back to Kwekwe, back to loving him and looking after him full time. I began to pray about it, and I felt God telling me, ask Kwekwe what he thinks. And at this stage, he was 12 years old, and so a lot of time had passed and a lot of things had happened, and I really wasn't sure what he would say, but I felt God saying to me, ask him. So I did, and when he said, yes, I want to come and live with you, I really took that as confirmation that this is what God wanted me to do.
Now listen, if you want to study teaching, Hannah's going to be here afterwards to sell you on the profession. If she didn't just now, crack of dawn, waking up, if that's your thing, she's going to sell you. she's gonna like encourage you, don't stress. But God is so faithful to just nurture the things he places in our hearts. For Hannah, it started with that tiny little seed of a little boy like crawling up and like really connecting with her at a holiday club. But it also was emphasized in her Interact committee and in swimming lessons and in her travels overseas even, where the Lord would nurture this desire to be a mom within her heart. And now came the opportunity to finally step into that role. Now, for many of us, I'm sure for many of us, you've had maybe a moment of clarity. Now, I say moment because for some people, it's this lingering feeling, and for Hannah, it was this theme in her life. But for some of us, maybe you've had that moment where you feel like this is the thing I'm supposed to do. This is the way I'm supposed to go. This is what it's going to look like, and this is what's going to be like when I get there. These moments of clarity. Now, some of us may have braved those steps already. Maybe you're on the brink. But wherever you find yourself this morning, what I'm trusting for is that even as Hannah shares, that the Lord would remind you of some things that he's spoken to you, some dreams that he's laid on your heart, whether it's 50 years ago, whether it was yesterday, that he would bring it to memory for you. And so, Hannah, you were still pretty fresh in your job in Grahamstown when this desire came about, and I'm sure it would come with a bit of complication. Now that you had certainty, this is the Lord, what was next?
Sure. So I handed in my resignation at my school in Grahamstown, and I started looking for jobs in East London. I started looking for accommodation. I went and I spoke to Greensleeves and to Kwekwe's biological mum to ask him for permission if he could come and live with me. And I even actually chatted to families who had gone through an adoption and fostering journey before. And I actually chatted to Badine Mance before I got to this church about that. Some people said that I was being naive and delusional in making the move. And I actually totally understand where they're coming from, because the job I was moving to paid a lot less, and the traveling that I had to do from my house in East London to my school was a lot more, so it was more expensive and it was dangerous. The move from Grahamstown to East London put strain on my relationship and added to the reasons that my boyfriend and I broke up. So from an earthly perspective, it did make zero sense, but I did really feel that this is what God was calling me to do. So in 2021, I made the move to finally live out my 10-year-long dream. But after 6 months, I was so confused. I thought that everything was going well, but Kwekwe was quite unhappy. To me, it didn't make sense because I'd given him a room of his own and love and affection and attention, but he wasn't happy. And even for the example of the room, I thought that I was blessing him, but he had grown up in a room full of other children. So to him, being alone in a room wasn't a blessing. He was lonely. And I had a difficult life lesson to learn. Sometimes what we think is best for someone isn't. And so the room example was just one example of many where I thought that I was blessing him and it wasn't necessarily doing that for him. So we had to have the difficult conversation about whether he'd stay with me or whether he'd go back to Greensleeves. And I remember when we decided that he'd go back, I was so confused, I was broken, I was disappointed. The life that I've been dreaming of and fighting for literally just came crashing down right in front of my eyes. And I was so angry. I was angry with myself because I felt that I failed. I hadn't done well enough. I was angry with Kwekwe. I felt that he was being ungrateful. And I was actually angry with God because I felt that he had misled me. At that moment in my life, I felt like everything was falling apart.
Now, I know even though you knew it would be a difficult road, I can't imagine you would have anticipated anything like this. From the highs to a fulfilled dream to the very, very lows of disappointment. Hannah changed her whole life for this dream. Her obedience was very costly. And I'm sure maybe some of us are sitting here this morning and you can resonate with this place Hannah found herself in. This place of deep disappointment, where you trusted and you believed, and the path seemed so clear. It was so obvious. Of course, this is the way we're going to do it. And then it didn't turn out the way you expected. Maybe you quit your job for the thing God laid on your heart. And now it's a few months later and you're like, oof, okay, that did not go to plan at all. Maybe you broke up with that guy because you felt God say he wasn't the one for you. But now it's been a few years and there's been no one else. And now you're like, sure, God, was that you? See, some people giggling because they're like, we're still waiting, God. Wait. But maybe you've been trusting to become a mom, and it's been 2, 3, maybe 10 years now, and it just hasn't materialized. Insert whatever situation you find yourself in. Maybe you bought the house, maybe you bought the car, maybe you got married, maybe you changed careers, and things are just not what you thought they would be right now. The truth is, sometimes things just don't go the way we plan. And I suppose therein lies the answer, doesn't it? It doesn't go the way we plan. Because the truth is, God can say a word, he can say the next step, and in my mind, I can already run 10 steps ahead, and I can already decide where exactly this path is taking me. He whispers, but I've already made a decision. I've already filled in the blanks. Because, surely if God calls me, it's to succeed, right? He calls me to success. We say that to each other all the time. But I suppose if I'm going to say that, I have to evaluate my definition of success. Because is success landing where I think I'm supposed to? Or was success saying yes to the Lord even though I didn't know? Is success trusting him instead of myself? Now, honestly, I wish I was that level-headed in these moments. That's not really what happens. I find myself more in a place that sounds like, God, where are you? Do I even hear you? Did I miss you entirely? Did I just ruin everything? I feel a bit more like Hannah did, filled with anger and disappointment. Now, Hannah, here you are in the midst of a massive struggle within your heart. How did you navigate the depth of your disappointment?
So in this difficult season, to be honest, I actually felt like a little hedgehog. So I just wanted to curl up and put out my spikes and my quills and just protect myself from all future hurt and disappointment. I never wanted to take a risk again, even if God was telling me to. But there's always a but. God told me to keep my heart soft. And he told me that a soft and malleable heart is where he does his best work. When we harden our hearts, we are shutting out the only person who can actually help and heal us. So by God's grace, I continued to talk to him. I continued to listen. He helped me not to let anger or bitterness take root in my heart. I continued to see Kwekwe and support him from the sidelines. And I'm so grateful that God helped me to keep an open and soft heart, because he did have another crazy plan for me up his sleeve.
Now, well done to you, Hannah, because what she did is by no means easy. Let's not for one moment think that it's an easy thing to keep your heart soft when everything in it wants to push away, because our natural instincts tend to lean towards fight or flight. Either I'm fighting off anything that can come at me or hurt me potentially, or I'm running away from any invitation from the Lord, anything that could cause me hurt. But to remain grounded and to remain talking to the Lord and still being open to invitation doesn't come naturally. It takes a very intentional leading of your heart. And so, Hannah, within your story, as I'm sure we all know, life really happens as linear as we'd like it to. There's normally about 12 things happening at least at once. And so as much as this was going on, this wasn't the only thing happening in your life. So won't you share with us what else was happening at the time and what the weeks and months following this great disappointment looked like?
Sure. So running concurrently to everything I've just said, in the year that I moved from Grahamstown to East London, my sister found a dog. And now I know you're thinking, how on earth does that have anything to do with the story? It's going to all make sense soon. So in 2021, my sister found an abused dog, and she asked my parents if they would keep it, and they said yes. So the lady from the SPCA came over to their house, and she looked at their wall, and she said, "I'm sorry, your wall is too low. You're going to need to make it higher." So my dad put the ladder over the wall, and then he went down to the neighbor below and asked him, "Is it okay with you if I work on both sides of our wall?" He said that it was fine, and while my dad was working on the wall, the neighbor's 2 little girls came running up. And my dad felt really sorry for them because their mom had passed away. And so my dad said, "Okay, come over, come and play with my wife," because my mom is also a foundation phase teacher. Yes, men do that. Yes, they make their wives do the work. Yes, they do. I never said that. And so sometimes when I came over on the weekends to visit my parents, these little girls were there, and I started to spend time with them and play with them, and I really had the heart for children. So I loved that they were there. Sometimes if I knew I was coming, I'd even ask my mum, "Oh, please, let the girls be there." And this one time, my mum said to me, "Okay, I'm going to take the girls and pass them back to their dad over the wall. Do you want to come with me?" And I said yes. And I just remember when I got there, my heart stopped. And I thought, wow, that man is handsome. And then we just started chatting, and it was just so natural. It just kept going, and eventually my mom, she just said to me, "Okay, I'm going inside. Like you guys can carry on, but I'm going inside." And I just remember when we finally finished speaking, just thinking, I genuinely never knew that a man like this existed. 2 years later, we were married in a forest, a dream come true. Today, I'm the wife of my neighbor and handsome husband. I am blessed to be the mom of those 2 precious girls who welcomed me into their lives with open arms. And they call me Mommy, which still warms my heart today. And as for Kwekwe, he's still one of the most precious people in my life. And he still doesn't live with me, but he comes to visit me on weekends and in the holidays. And he loves that there's other children around now.
What a beautiful illustration of what can happen when we choose to lean into the Lord's leading, even when we're not entirely sure how the story can end well anymore. Now, Hannah's story doesn't necessarily point to a fairy tale wedding, even though that's a wonderful extra. But what it points to is how a life of joy doesn't always look the way you plan. It doesn't always look the way you expect, but it is found along the way of the little yeses you say to the Lord. It's found when you allow Him to author the story, even though you're really fond of the pages you wrote yourself. Now, looking back, it all seems so clear. It's all wonderful hindsight, right? But it wasn't so clear in the moment. And I'm sure if Hannah knew there was a handsome pastor waiting on the other side of this journey, it would have been a lot easier to persevere. But God used that journey through the valley, where everything was murky and unclear, to take Hannah on a completely different path that she didn't plan for herself. 2 little girls calling her mom, and Kwekwe still being a constant part of her life. A dream much bigger than she would have imagined. So Hannah, what do you take away from this journey?
So walking out where God has called me to hasn't always been easy. I've had to brave some scary storms, grow as a wife and as an instant mom. I've had to cling to Jesus for strength and for guidance and for wisdom. And I've had to learn to give myself grace when I get things wrong, because I really do get things wrong. But God knew my story from start to finish. And even though it didn't turn out exactly the way that I thought it would, or perhaps even the way I wanted it to, I'm so grateful. Because God's story is so much bigger, so much better, and so much more joyful than we could ever imagine. Because they're not really our stories, they're God's.
Amen to that. Listen, give us a love. You know, Hannah's story is maybe our invitation to change our perspective on a few things this morning. Now, something I've learned over the last few years is that joy has a lot more to do with my perspective on my circumstances than my actual circumstances. What are you going to choose to see? Are you going to choose to see the disaster and the heartache in front of you? Or will you trust God's long-distance vision over your own? Now, perhaps you feel like life is falling apart, like Hannah did. Maybe it's been one thing after another thing after another thing, and things are just not looking the way they're supposed to. The breakthrough should have been here already. Everything should have looked different, and maybe even this idea of hoping for anything different feels completely hopeless right now. Now, I want to encourage you to do as Hannah did. Hannah fought for the condition of her heart. And make no mistake, it is a fight. It is not something that comes easy. You know, most things in our Christian walk, we would love to come with a warm, fluffy feeling. I mean, I personally love a warm, fluffy feeling. But the truth is, most things don't. Most things require simply a decision. It's something where you lead your heart, and sometimes your heart is willing, sometimes it's not. We need to make a choice whether we're going to trust God with the unknown or let cynicism and disappointment take a hold of us. Now, I want to encourage you to, as Hannah, to keep talking to the Lord if you've stopped, to start again. And to remember that prayer isn't this plea and this begging for God to do something and get something from him. I want you to remember that Jesus is our friend. So how do you show up with your closest friend? Not just any friend, that friend who when they ask you how you are and you're like, I'm fine, they're like, no, you're not. How are you? How do you show up for that friend? How do you share your heart? You be honest. You share with them, but then you also don't dominate the conversation and you allow them to speak into it. You allow them to share and you allow them to love you. That's how we show up for Jesus as well. Now, you might not know what your story holds the way Hannah does. She's living in her answered prayer. But in the light of her story, this is your invitation to say to the Lord, you know how beautifully you wrote hers? Write mine too. Her story is our invitation. And so, Hannah, thank you again for sharing. Why don't you give us some more love? Now, the thread this morning, if you haven't noticed it, is that a joyful life sometimes looks a little different to how you plan. For Yukta, she had a career on her mind. She thought, if I got my job, if I get into Nestlé, Coca-Cola, one of those places, then I'm going to be set. But then Jesus rocked her world, and she's like, oh, it's not actually about any of that. It's about Jesus. Then in Hannah's story, she thought a fulfilled life is going to look like a life with kwekwe. She's going to live out her dream of this little boy of way back when who crawled into her lap at a holiday club. But God had a different plan. He saw a much bigger picture, and a picture that maybe she wouldn't have imagined for herself. A picture so much bigger where now there's two little girls calling her mom, and kwekwe is still a part of the picture. And I mentioned at the start that I'd share a little bit of my story as well, and I suppose I kind of fit into this theme as well, as the Lord does, speaking with one voice. Now, I had a very clear idea of what I thought joy would look like and what it should be like, and I was quite rudely awakened when I realized it was not that at all. And it wasn't until I took a hold of God's picture that my picture changed. And so my story and the season that inspired the writing of this book called Unconventional Joy, which is there at the back, a shameless plug. It's okay, I have permission from Sonika. It's played out in a season over the course of 2020 and 2021. You know, that beautiful time in everybody's life. We all have a story of that time. But to be honest with you, I started 2020 like super excited. I 100% bought into 2020. Remember, we were all like, it's going to be 2020. I was that person. It's going to be 2020 of abundance, of joy. God is going to do amazing things. Pandemic somewhere in China, who cares? It's going to be amazing. Like, I was there for it. I had a vision for the year. I was like, yes, it's going to be awesome. But as we've seen this morning, sometimes things don't go according to your own plan, as mine did not either. Now, I go into a little more detail in the introduction of the book, but what I thought would be a season of new beginnings and exciting things turned out to be A season filled with anxiety, with fear, with loneliness, and just about every possible thing that I didn't want to deal with: grief, broken relationships, all the things. I was struggling with anxiety to the point where, now I don't consider myself an anxious person. It's not something I battled with at all in my life, but I was having panic attacks regularly throughout the year of 2020, which is great when you're living by yourself. It was wonderful. So 2020, instead of 2020, became the year of downward spiral more than anything. And the company I kept was isolation and loneliness and relational strain. I couldn't even tell you everything that happened, because honestly, it's one of those death by 1,000 paper cuts thing. Like, it's not the massive things. It's the one thing on top of the other thing, on top of the other thing, on top of that other thing, which then feels unreasonable to freak out about that thing, but you're forgetting about the 50 other ones that it's lying on top of. And 2021 then became the year where everything that was under the surface of 2020 started bubbling to the surface. Yeah, I couldn't hide it anymore. Now, in April that year, a very significant relationship in my life came crashing down around me. And that was probably my greatest fear. In terms of fears I was battling, that was my fear. It was the fear of being rejected, the fear of being left behind, the fear of not meeting the mark. I mean, I'd spent so much time away from people. I was like, you're all going to realize you don't need me, and you're just going to push me away. And it ended up happening. And ironically, as much as I could see the fractures, the more I tried to fix it, the more I made it worse. Now, let's just add failure to that list of things as well. You tried super hard and you failed. Now, where I was having 1,000 paper cuts, I now had a couple of flesh wounds. We needed to be tended to, but alas, I did not. I left everything because I felt overwhelmed. I didn't really know what to do. And I'm like, too much. Let's leave it. But then 2 months later, one of my closest friends would lose her husband in a tragic accident. And honestly, like 2021 was the year of, but wait, there's more. There was always something around the corner. And as soon as you thought you got the worst of it, there was another thing. And everything started accumulating because you didn't deal with a thing like 5 things ago. And now we're already at this one. And by the start of July that year, the previous year of fear and anxiety and pain had caught up with me. And I still remember, after the memorial of my friend's husband, I went home and I crawled into my bed and I stayed there. I didn't open a curtain, I didn't open a window, I didn't talk to another human being for a week. The most I did was receive the Checker 6060 order that was delivered to my house, which I'm sure that man is still telling stories of that awful lady that came down that day in her pajamas and her rough hair. And so listen, if you ever feel like you want to make an order, but it's been a rough day, it could be that guy, and he's seen worse. So you're okay. You're welcome. You're welcome, everyone. Don't feel shame. Oh, man, I eventually got out of bed, though, because, I mean, you can only skip out of work for so long until people really start looking for you. And so for a week, I stayed in bed. I didn't talk to anyone. I got up the next week, but in my heart, I was still in the dark room. Nothing had shifted. And I stayed here for months, literally for months. I had a standing coffee date with a really good friend, probably the only like secure relationship in my life at the time. And bless her beautiful heart, but she kept asking me how I was every time. And I don't know how she did, because I never shared a different story. It stayed, I was a broken record. Everything is awful. Nothing can be good again. I'm hopeless. I'm over it. I'm tired of trying. I don't know what the point is anymore. Next week, it's the same thing. And now listen, in the beginning of a journey, that's fine. Like, it's good to have these conversations. It's good to get it out. But at some point, the conversation has to change. At some point, I can't talk about the same thing in the same way anymore. And I was stuck. I was stuck in a loop. And I couldn't get out of it. I knew God wasn't hopeless. I knew that He was there. And yet I couldn't get out of it. I was stuck. And I remember we had a coffee date the one day at Lavender Blue, as you do when you attend Shofar Church. If you want to see everyone, if you miss them on Sunday, you just go to Lavender Blue. You'll see them there. You see. So I left. We had a coffee one morning, and I left. And on this little Lavender Blue road, I was so frustrated with myself. I was angry because I'm like, I don't like how I sound. I can hear myself talk, but I don't know how to stop talking that way. I don't know how to stop sounding negative, and I don't know how to get out of this loop. And I prayed in the car, and I said, God, like, I cannot anymore. I don't have a warm, fluffy feeling, and I've been waiting for one. I don't have one. I am frustrated. And I said to the Lord, I am making an appointment with you, and I've done this a few times in my life. I don't know if you can build a theology around it, but I'm like, Lord, I'm making an appointment tonight, 7 o'clock, me and you, like, phone is off, supper's going to be done, dish is going to be packed away, like, we need to talk, and I am not leaving until you say something, until something happens, and we're clearing the next day. If that means we're staying up all night, this is happening, because I cannot anymore. I've had enough. And so later that night, I was sitting in the living room floor in my house, and I sat with my Bible. Here is my trusty little Bible, the very one I sat with. And I knew I should probably read it. It's probably a good start, because I'd gotten so disconnected over the last few months. My prayers had like dwindled, and I wasn't really reading my Bible, because what do you read? I don't know. I don't have any capacity to think about it. And I sat there with my Bible, and I'm like, okay, now what? And like a light bulb moment, I was like, Philippians. I'll read Philippians. It's 4 little chapters. I can read it quick. Great, because then I can check off, I read my Bible. And I didn't fail at that, because I succeeded. So out of nowhere, Philippians came to mind. Now, the book of Philippians is a very interesting read when you feel the way I felt. Because what I was waiting for is I was waiting for the verse that goes, shame, man. Life's hard, eh? It's so unfair. Poor you. I was waiting. But what I found was a book I didn't resonate with at all. It was very uncomfortable, because the Apostle Paul, who wrote Philippians, is so ridiculously optimistic about everything. Listen, if you haven't read it there, and if you've read it, it's been a long time, trust me, it's ridiculous. Okay, it felt like sliding down the wrong side of a cheese grater. It was so uncomfortable. Like, there was nothing in my life that I saw the way this apostle did. Nothing. Like, in the first chapter, he speaks about his excitement of being imprisoned and how that is leading everyone else to boldly declare the gospel. And I'm like, I can't see the positive of my hurt feelings. And you're wrongfully imprisoned. Okay. And I remember I read it about 2 or 3 times, because I'm like, okay, I must be missing the verse I'm looking for, because this is not doing it. And I remember saying to the Lord, I do not resonate with this book, hoping that he's going to say, no, I meant Job. Or, go read Lamentations or something. I was hoping. But instead, what came to mind was I felt the Holy Spirit very clearly to say to me, Lelané, you don't resonate with this book because your life doesn't look this way. Which is a little problematic when you think about it, because the whole point of reading your Bible is to be transformed by it. Hebrew talks about it being a double-edged sword, and that it doesn't just cut to joint and marrow, but it cuts so deep to the point where it separates your own thoughts and intentions. Like, that's how deep it's supposed to cut. And the fact that I'm not being transformed by it, the fact that I'm not living this, is a problem. Because if I'm going to say, hey, I'm a Christian, I believe this book is true, then there must be fruit of that. And I had no fruit. And so it felt like I was at a crossroads in that moment, like I had to make a decision now. Am I going to keep going the way I'm going, which took no effort at all, because it just meant leaning into every feeling I had. So it's the path of least resistance. Maybe we'll just stay here. Or do I try this whole Apostle Paul thing in Philippians, and let's try see things the way he does. Let's try do this. Now, the going with the flow thing I've tried, it didn't work. I didn't like it. But I must say the whole doing the things he said also didn't seem very appealing. So it wasn't an easy decision. But I just decided, like, okay, if something needs to shift, then I need to shift. Something needs to happen. And so I read those 4 little chapters, which in some translations, literally, it's like 2 little page flips. It's so short. I read it for about 4 to 6 months every single day. I read it verse by verse by verse by verse by verse. And I was like, I will not move on from a verse until there's some form of fruit, until there's some form of practice, or at least that it's ingrained in my brain enough that instead of thinking this negative thing, I'll think this instead. And it was a challenge. I wish I can say it came naturally. It didn't. And I know it's going to sound very dramatic, but I thought I was dying there for a while. It felt too costly. It felt like too much. Because in Philippians, the theme is service and perspective. And I didn't want to serve. And I had an awful perspective. So it didn't come naturally at all. But funny thing, meditating on the scriptures, over time, my eyes started to shift away from everything making me miserable, and I started to look to God. I stopped looking stopped looking at other people to make me feel loved and accepted, and I realized, wait, but I am. And instead of wanting to please everyone else, I wanted to please God now. That was the important one. Yeah. And the more my focus shifted to this, it didn't matter anymore if anyone ever said sorry or went, oh, we see how hurt you are, because that was my solution. My solution was, when we all say sorry, when we all hug each other and everything's resolved, then we're going to be good. But God's like, no, we don't need to do that, because nothing changed in anyone else in that season of my life. Nothing. But I changed. I changed a lot. Relational dynamics, everything stayed the same. But I shifted. And I started looking at life through the lenses of these pages instead of the lenses of my own hurt. And that's the heart behind this book. I call it Unconventional Joy, because joy didn't come really the way I thought it would. And it didn't look the way I thought it would. This book, my Bible, was the ladder that got me out of the dark hole that I was in. And because it was for me, I am absolutely convinced that it is for you as well. That we can be so running after someone to pray for me and give me a revelation and the now thing, but we have a book. And I know some of us think it's not for us, but I would dare to say that if someone you loved very much was no longer here and they left you a letter, that you wouldn't say, oh, well, I wish I sent a voice note. Sorry, not going to read it. You would consume it every day. It would remind you of their heart for you. It would remind you of them and who they are and who you were in the light of them. And so I wrote this book, but this book isn't the words of life. Don't be mistaken. It's available at the back. It's a tool. It's a tool to help you get into the big one. That is the words of life. That is the thing that gives life when it feels like there is none. And so at the beginning of this morning, we asked the question, how do we embrace a life of joy? Do we deny reality? Do we remain unaffected by life's most challenging moments? Well, I would say certainly not. Because in all of Paul's writings in the Bible, he wrote like 2/3 of it, so there's a lot. But he never shies away from actually saying what he's feeling. If he's being persecuted, he talks about being persecuted. He doesn't pretend like it's not happening. But he does share a perspective on it. He's not hopeless about it. He's like, yeah, you're coming for me, but I have a God who's fighting for me. He doesn't deny reality. He doesn't live in a fairy world where we're just going to pretend. He addresses the reality, but he addresses the reality in the light of God, in the light of his reality. And so he models that joy is not about circumstances. It's not about external things changing, because I really hate to be the person to tell you, when you leave here, your circumstances might look exactly the same as they did when you walked in here. But you don't have to. You can look different. And so if I could leave you with anything this morning, it would be to get into this book, get into your Bible, get into the Word. And it's something that you can kind of brush off and say, yeah, we're a Christian, we must read our Bible. But it is like Matthew, it was Matthew that said, his words are the words of life. Like there's no one else has that. And we need the words of life. Don't believe the lie that it's not for you, because it is. It can transform you. It transformed me. It really did. It seems so simple to say, yeah, I read my Bible and my life was changed. I didn't just read it. when you read it to live it and apply it, it reads very differently. It doesn't go down as smooth, let me tell you, some of them. This book is radical. Like, it sounds simple, but if you've read it, like, just forgive your enemy, radical. Radical. It is not as simple as you think, and it is the answer to most things in our life. That is what I would leave with you. But I want to know, on that note, what the ladies next to me would want to leave you with as well. So, Yukta, if you could leave the ladies with one thing this morning based on your story, what would you like to leave with them?
If I could leave you with just one revelation, a gift, it would be this. You were made before their opinions, their expectations, before the labels and the limitations. Divine grace had already been spoken over you. You were created with purpose, with value, and with intention. So wherever you are right now and whoever you believe yourself to be, know this as well. You were made for more. Not more by this world's standards, but more in God's plan. More joy, more healing, more freedom, more wholeness. You are not an accident of circumstance. You are a masterpiece in progress.
Amen. Amen. Thanks, Yukta. Hannah, what would you like to leave with the ladies this morning?
Sometimes when everything feels like it's falling apart, it's actually falling into place. We only see in part, but God sees the whole. So trust him. He will lead you to places you'd never thought you'd go, but where you've always been destined to be.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, ladies. That brings us to the end of our session. So would you do me a great kindness, and will you stand and then remain standing and just give a bit of love to the ladies who shared this morning?